And we have I've done it before, but some people who ask a question tell another story and become a second speaker. So if you have a question, we always want you to ask your question, but get to the question fairly quickly. And again, I mean, I'm guilty of doing that. So thank you for listening, and Davante.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to join you here today to talk to you about where I see Louisiana going, what we're doing at the Public Service Commission, and how things can improve. For those of you who do not know who I am, I'm Davante Lewis. I proudly represent the 3rd District on the Louisiana Public Service Commission, which includes half of here, Baton Rouge, goes through the river parishes and concludes with majority of the city of New Orleans. That makes up my district, which is 971,000 constituents. So you can imagine how that is when there's a power outage. Over the years since I last spoke to you, there has been a lot of different things that have changed in what we have to look at in towards Louisiana. You are hearing about this industrial renaissance, this booming economic development that you're going to see along the chemical corridor from Lake Charles all the way down to New Orleans. And many people talk only about the economics of this boom, but not too many people are talking about what does that actually do for the energy consumption in our state. How can Louisiana survive, right, and keeping energy bills low while also inviting this significant economic development? And so I'm going to start off with a little bit of kind of level-setting facts about why I think this question is so important for us. Louisiana, per capita, has the highest energy consumption than any other place in the nation. And this is typically because of our large energy-intensive chemical, petrochemical, petroleum, and natural gas industry. When you think about all the energy that is consumed, 69% of all the energy consumed in Louisiana comes from a large commercial or an industrial energy user. And so when we talk about the rise in rates and what is affecting us, this is one of the serious questions that we must address. But when we think about that small level of energy being consumed by just our residents and our small businesses, there's another problem that we face. Louisiana also has the highest per capita residential sector of electricity compensation in the nation. So when you take into a fact that, one, the vast majority of our energy consumed is by these large commercial and industrial users, and then that small percent that's left of our residents, what they are paying, they are also paying the highest rates in the nation. Louisiana's households with incomes of below 50% of the federal poverty level pay nearly 29% of their annual income simply from their energy bills. That's over 150,000 households in the state of Louisiana. What we are going to face with when we talk about this industrial renaissance is a real challenge of how do we continue to provide electricity at a low cost, but also that protects our environment and our people. And this is in the utility world known as base load growth. This is why I am deeply concerned about the move to bring data centers and AI centers to the state of Louisiana. They suck up a large chunk of energy. They typically then have those costs socialized among all of us and could endanger our quest to move to more renewable energy here in this state. I mean, when we talk about renewable energy, there's some facts that I want to lay on about why Louisiana has to think about this industrial renaissance in a new way. When we come and we think about the diversification of our grid, only 3% of all the energy produced in Louisiana comes from what we would call a renewable source. However, Louisiana has the potential to generate up to 13,000 megawatts of solar, equivalent to the state's electric demand if we make those significant investments. Right now, only 0.61% of our entire grid is based off of solar capacity. Now, when you think about the growing world in solar, most people want to put it and say, well, we can't do solar because that's anti-oil and gas. And what I remind people is solar is not an enemy of oil and gas. So solar is actually not even a competitor of oil and gas. When we are thinking about the energy source that we use, we're typically talking about natural gas, methane. And so when you think about who actually wants solar in this state, you would be surprised to know that in my year and a half in being in office, the people that have come to me the most about solar power has not been residents. It has not been what some may say the liberals in my district in New Orleans. It has been Shell. It's been Oxy. It's been Air Liquide, Air Products. Our industrial users desperately want renewable energy for their sustainability and their investor goals. And so when we think about why we should diversify our electric grid, we cannot fall in the old way of thinking that it is one sector versus another sector, because what we are seeing is what many would call the economic drivers of Louisiana are those who very much want the same renewable energy that sadly this state is fighting. But there's been some good news. Just recently, the Environmental Protection Agency gave Louisiana over $146 million to deploy solar energy to homes and apartments across this state and create solar hubs through community and rooftop solar investments. It also is going to allow for the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources to think of solar initiatives focused on low-income and disadvantaged communities, to deploy that solar, that energy storage, and enable upgrades on single and multi-family homes. And this grant also gives us deployment of low-cost and easy-to-access financing options to reach those otherwise left out of the Clean Energy Hub, including new equitable loan programs for community resilience hubs, resilient schools, and disadvantaged businesses. So we are seeing that the federal government is looking at Louisiana to be a leader on solar. And I tell everyone, we often say Louisiana's competing for Texas. Well, I'll tell you, Texas is producing solar at a record number right now. So if we want to be like Texas, Louisiana must embrace solar energy and capacity to our state. And you can see this by some of the work that we're doing at the Public Service Commission. I strongly believe that we at the Public Service Commission must re-examine our net metering policies and make sure that we have a fair and just compensation rate to more adequately reflect the total benefits of what residential and community solar would mean. I also think we have to examine how we define community solar and those thresholds that we use to encourage more and bigger projects. I mean, if you think about the imagination that we could have, if we simply used all of our commercial buildings that exist and putting solar in there as an option of putting power on the grid, we could really develop a significant change for ourselves. Because what we are seeing is virtual power plants are not only cost effective, but they allow us to go from just consumers of energy to prosumers of energy. And this, I think, is one of the biggest challenges that we face ourselves when we talk about that industrial renaissance. Are we going to allow other people outside of the utilities to be able to produce generation to save the rest of us from the cost? And what I mean by that, if we are incentivizing rooftop solar, residential solar, we are utilizing battery storage or even maybe nuclear, what we can do is instead of building another 30-year gas power plant, we can find that excess capacity that we need to all put it on the grid. And so now we are all not only just consuming the energy that, as you know, we consume the most in this country, we are now also being people who produce that energy. And these are some of the votes you're going to see coming up. On the commission meeting this Wednesday, we will take up phase 1 of what we call our customer-centric options docket. One of those items would require all utilities to create a green tariff option, which means if you want to purchase renewable power and have it sent to your home, each utility must give you that option so that you can showcase the demand of why we need more renewable energy. We will also look at what we're calling a wholesale pass-through PPA, a purchase power agreement, for our large industrial users. And this will lead us into our second phase, where we are significantly looking at whether or not we should let the industrial users buy capacity generation at their own risk, not costing us a dime, and then being able to sell any excess power that they produce back onto the grid. And so some would argue, as you may hear the utilities start to argue, that this is a complete workaround. It is shifting the cost to the least of these and those who can't pay the most. If you listen to the industrial users, they're saying, we know we want renewable power. We know we are the biggest consumers of energy in this state of Louisiana. Let us help the state by going out and contracting with a private developer for our generation. We will still pay the transmission and distribution costs, but we will take up that cost so we don't have to build power plants for the rest of Louisiana. And so the commission, we will take this up. And this will be a very hot debate. I'm expecting, if you all want a good show, to watch the commission meeting on Wednesday. We are also on YouTube, because I feel like you will see the differences of the thoughts that we have on that commission. But that will then lead us into the last phase of the customer-centric options docket that we should take a vote on by the end of Q3 of 2025, which comes to one of the biggest questions we always get. Should you be able to choose your electric provider? We will tackle whether or not retail choice makes sense in Louisiana. I'm not prepared to answer that question today. There's still a lot of research and work to be done, but it is a commitment of why we have to think about things differently in Louisiana. As we know, we are in hurricane season. And as you have seen over the last few weeks, that we have had significant rainstorms that have come in the afternoons that have completely taken out power. This is a deep concern of mine about how we must look at our utility regulation business very differently than what we did over the past 100 years. When we talk about building a reliable and resilient system, all options should be on the table. And one of the reasons I started with solar, because if we incentivize solar and include battery storage, we could there turn the grid right back on in some of these power outages, which is not the case in some of the other situations of generation mix that we are using. But why is this important to us? Because when we think about the frequency of power outages outside of natural disasters, Louisiana is the leader in the nation. According to the EIA data, the average total annual electric power interruptions duration and frequencies by customers in the United States in the year 2021, Louisiana led the way. While the U.S. average was just over 1.5 interruptions for about 5 hours, Louisiana saw over 3.6 interruptions per customers, with a total duration of the annual outage interruptions in hours at 80 hours a day. When you think about that, the United States, and I'm going to show you this graph to show you just how far off Louisiana is. When you look at all the states, here you go, the United States average is right here. Our brothers and sisters in Mississippi is right here. Where's Louisiana? Way over here. We have some of the most power outages than any other place, and our grid is simply just not reliable. And so what is the commission doing? We have some pending rules that we are hopefully going to debate and finalize soon. One would be our resiliency rulemaking, which would require utilities to make significant investments in upgrading their systems, requiring them to look at burying lines underground, switching from wooden poles to metal poles and other type of emerging technologies that would lower disruptions. We are also looking at our pole attachment rules, which would require the utilities, along with the telecom community, to make significant changes into how they attach their equipment on each other's poles. When you're driving around the city and you oftentimes see a half-cut pole, typically what the issue is that pole is owned by either a telecommunication company or the utility company. One of them has changed the pole, the other didn't come out and remove their equipment, so they cut it in half, leaving their equipment there, and then now they fight over who that remaining pole belongs to. And so when you look at the debris and all of the challenges we see across this state, that is part of the problem. So we are significantly looking at making sure we make a database of those poles so we can identify who owns that pole, changing the fee structure so we're ensuring connectivity and reliability on those issues, and really providing our grid to be more modernized. And then last, one of our rules that we have pending for us is our grid maintenance rule. How do we ensure we reduce these outages? What are those types of policies that require us to do? Now, you may have recently seen that just 2 months ago, the Commission approved a $1.9 billion resiliency spending by Entergy Louisiana. This $1.9 billion would be spent over 5 years, and the new project implementation would start throughout the first 3 years. And the last 2 years will wrap up those projects of completion. Most of these projects include resiliency hardening of our grid, specific distribution and transmission assets, and about $88 million on dead-end structures over the 2024 through 2026. And you will see the average bill impact of this would go from about 56 cents for someone who's consuming about 1,200 kilowatt hours in year one to around $7.11 in year 5, which would be 2028. Now, I was one of the 2 commissioners that voted against this plan, and I'll explain to you why I did that. Part of the reason I voted no is because this plan did not require modernization of our grid to the fullest of its ability. One of the requirements I wanted us to see is how are we innovative in this moment? How do we look at our grid's improvement? I felt this plan fell short. Secondly, I felt this plan fell short because it also was not done in a very transparent way. This was not a hearing. This did not go through our normal procedures. Entergy Louisiana requested a rule suspension, added this to the agenda on Monday, and we took a vote on Friday for a $1.9 billion spending package. I just could not allow that. I made a motion to defer the item, but on a 3-2 vote, my colleagues decided not to defer. But what was also concerning about this energy plan is that in the very last second, as we were taking the vote, an amendment was offered, or modification, I should say, was offered by one of my colleagues that would change the cost allocations from residentials to industrials in a whopping $304 million. And so what we did is, when the plan was originally filed, Entergy had the industrial users paying about 33% of the distribution cost. At the very last second before we took that vote, we switched that distribution cost to 16%, meaning residential users and small commercial users will now take on $304 million extra dollars in spending than what Entergy had proposed. That, to me, was also troubling. Another fact that made me very troubled about this decision is that we don't actually have a cap on spending in this plan. Now, we have capped the number of projects, which will be 2,100 projects throughout the state of Louisiana. But we did not put a financial cap, which means, as we know, as the cost of inflation goes up, pricing, contracting, this $1.9 billion may not actually be $1.9 billion when all said and done. And so I was deeply concerned that we could not put a price cap. And the last reason why I voted against this plan is I wanted to tie it to performance-based mechanisms. One of the things that I wanted to do is says, Entergy, you cannot earn your top return on equity with this rider. What we're going to do is, because you're asking for this outside spending of your rates of $1.9 billion, let's reduce your ROE, and if you come under budget and on time with those spending projects, you will get to go back to your return on equity. Sadly, they did not accept that, and we did not force them to do that. And why do I think that's troubling? As we talk about these interruptions and these investments, we have to ensure that our utilities are actually making the upgrades that benefit us. And the only way that I believe that we can do that is by changing the way that we make rates from being how much does it cost to provide services to how well are you performing, and adding these mechanisms. And so as we continue, Entergy does have a pending rate case before the commission. They are requesting a extension of a rate plan that they're currently on, and if we grant that extension, it would be about $173 million rate increase that they requested. But if we don't accept that, and we go into what is called a full rate case, which is where we look under the hood, we examine everything, Entergy says, well, we'll no longer just only ask for $173 million, we'll ask for $433 million in rate increases, because we're going to claim a bunch of stuff that is depreciation and value, and we want to claim our depreciation. We are currently negotiating and looking at what this should be. I still stand pretty firm that I believe it is time for Entergy Louisiana to have an entire rate case. The commission has not looked at every accounting issue at Entergy in 10 years. We've just been on these plans that we've established. But I am willing to do an extension of their formula rate plan, but it must include significant performance mechanisms to reduce the number of outages, to reduce the number of disconnections, to ensure that they're spending more on transmission lines, and that they are making the requirements that we do. I want to leave you with this about why it is so important that we work across the states to improve our electric grid and interconnect ourselves with other regions. If Louisiana and Arkansas, through Entergy, was fully interconnected with the neighbor service territories, we could have saved customers in 2022 alone $930 million. Making investments in transmission is significantly important, not only for the reliability of our grid, but for the affordability of our people. And this is why it is so important that we work on transmission. I will tell you, as a commissioner, I was a little disappointed to see the legislature pass Senate Bill 108 that was offered by Senator Seabaugh. And what this particular piece of legislation did was limit expropriation of land for transmission build-out unless 50% of the electricity was deposited in Louisiana. Now, I'll tell you that's a very complicated way to do, because Louisiana operates in a market system, right? We buy energy in what we call MISO South. It is a market where you can purchase power, and as anybody will tell you, electrons move wherever they want to go. Why this bill, I think, is one of the most concerning for me as a utility regulator that was passed, because when you severely limit the ability to build transmission outside of the incumbent utility, you are disproportionately now putting those costs back onto the people. Now, this particular legislation was in response to a transmission line that's being proposed by Pattern Energy called Southern Spirit. It would have went from North Texas through North Louisiana, and it would conclude in Mississippi. This transmission line would have not cost a ratepayer in Louisiana a single dime. But because some landowners, some rich landowners, in North Louisiana were upset with this company, they went to the legislature, passed this bill, and I think it sent one of the strongest messages to private development that Louisiana is not open for business when it comes to transmission planning. And what that means is if we are not building those interconnections to buy power at the cheapest rate from wherever it may be and transmit it through those lines, we are doubling down on having to build more gas generation here in Louisiana, which affects our climate and affects people's pocketbook. I just want to tell you about what we saw on Friday. Friday, in the SPP market, as we know it in utility regulation, which covers a lot of the Midwestern states, 50% of that grid was using wind energy that day. Also on Friday, when you look, the states in the north that are in MISO that are using wind power were paying about $16 per kilowatt hour. In Louisiana, we were paying $26. If we built better transmission interconnections, we can buy that cheap wind power in the Dakotas, send it down to Louisiana, and we would have been paying maybe around $20 instead of $26. And so why do I say transmission is important? Because I think we have to realize the electrons that we produce when we generate power will move wherever we tell them to go. They are not identified to a region. They are not solidified to a particular plant. They are going to be transmitted wherever. So if we truly want to have lower electric bills, making better strong interconnections, building transmission can reduce the need for building more generators. Because what we see is these power plants are now costing us millions and millions of dollars, and we're seeing that. When you look at the recent utility filings at the Commission, the amount of expansion of power plants that are on the books are astronomical, and their price tag is getting higher. And so that's not to say we don't need more capacity from electricity. The question that I'm asking is, how do we get it and who pays for it? And can we do it in a cheaper, better, more sustainable way? That, I think, is the real challenge for the Commission as we see the changing ecosystem. As we are seeing more industry need electricity and power, as we are looking towards a world that wants renewable energy, but we also have to ensure that we have the power to stay on in a storm or on peak demand, we have to ask ourselves, are we creating an electric system that fits the 21st century and fits 2024? Or are we still governing ourselves and providing services in a way like we were in the 1920s when we first started the electric business? That, I think, is the big challenge of what I am trying to change. I am fundamentally working to change what we know as the regulatory compact. When we incentivized the utilities in the early 20s to build electricity and build up our infrastructure, we gave them an incentive to build because the federal government couldn't do it. But the challenge for us right now in this moment is we can't get them to stop building. And there are options on the table that can provide the same services, the same reliability, the same sustainability in a more environmental friendly way, in a cost-effective way, and we must say, can we incentivize that? Can we incentivize a utility finding ways to make us use less energy, using energy sources that protect our people and protect our planet, instead of just incentivizing build, build, and build? And so I will end in the words of two great philosophers, I like to say, Warren G. and Nate Dogg. It is time for regulators to mount up and handle these challenges. Thank you. Well, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the challenges that we have to do, especially because we are so hurricane prone, is bypassing those rules and requiring them to do so. Under the commission, we have what is called an integrated resource plan. It is a 20-year outlook that the utility is required to file with us, which is not pre-approval of any projects or investments, but it is what do you see for the next 20 years? And sadly, the utilities most of the time do not include transmission and distribution level planning. I voted against Entergy and CLECO's integrated resource plan because I said you didn't tell me how you plan to do exactly some of those stuff so we can examine the cost. Because typically what is happening right now is we're not looking to see where we're supposed to be going, enforcing what I believe should be rules around transmission and distribution. And then we have a storm that comes that knocks out the distribution and transmission systems. And then what do? We have to rebuild it, we securitize it, and then we put it as a rider on your bill. We have been paying off the Hurricane Katrina rider since that storm. On the very month that we rolled off the Hurricane Katrina rider, we rolled on a 15-year Hurricane Ida rider. And I believe unless we do something different, we will be in that cycle ever ending.
These large companies like Exxon or Shell or Entergy, West Texas, in my mind, is dirt, but Louisiana are crops. So if you go across the river here, you see solar panels of where you used to have crops. Have you considered, or do you consider it important for the commission to incentivize putting solar panels on rooftops or areas that are currently not crops?
Absolutely. I mean, I think commercial solar is extremely important and something we don't talk about enough. When we typically talk solar, most people go straight to the agriculture, and so I'm going to come back to that portion in a second. But I think one of the things that we desperately need to do is utilize commercial spaces. I've been talking with Walmart and Amazon about ensuring that they can put solar, but one of the challenges is we as the commission have to incentivize that. Because right now, if you look at the avoided cost of the rate that you would get from putting commercial solar or even rooftop solar, it's not really affordable to you. The state took away the solar tax credit, which means now there's no true incentivization to do so, but that could be a door of opportunity. Secondly, I think we also, when we talk about agriculture, have to look at the growing science. And so I've been in conversations with the Department of Agriculture on what we call agrogalactics. This is the study of how crops and solar can coexist on the same space. And we are seeing places like Iowa and Minnesota do this especially well. Now, not every crop will that matter, right? It's not going to work for every type of agriculture, but I don't think it is as much of a competition as the current debate has made it, because the science has showed us that they can live. One of the things I just was recently reading this morning is about floating solar, utilizing our waterways as a way to put solar on there, building those interconnections. So there are so many different ways that we can. I think it just requires us to really look at innovation and the incentives that we give to companies to do so.
If I could follow up, maybe I misrepresented to you. I'm talking about incentivizing Entergy to put solar on somebody's house or whatever, not the individual that's going to get money back. Because that becomes very cost incentive. It becomes what's your interest rate rather than Entergy's interest rate, maybe tying it to the mortgage or tying it to the land. That's a whole different thing, and that would come from you all to the legislature. Incentivizing Shell or Entergy or such to say, we're going to go put these things on all of these, whether it be Walmart. Walmart would be only just one thought of there.
So that goes back to something I mentioned in my statements. That type of work is what some of these big industrial users are asking the commission to do. And like I said, we will take up that vote in the end of the fourth quarter of this year, which would allow a industrial user to go purchase and develop solar at their own cost and not have to go through the utility. Because I think where I hear your question, but what I'm trying to break down for you is right now, all solar procurement really goes through the utility. And so when we changed our net metering rules in 2019 at the commission, what used to happen is that if you produced, let's say, 400 megawatts of solar, and let's say your house used 600 megawatts of solar, use 600 megawatts of capacity, you would only pay Entergy or your utility company that 200 that you got from them. What the commission did in 2019, which I vehemently disagreed with, was change it to a buy-all, sell-all. So what Entergy does now, our utility company, would buy all 400 megawatts from you and then sell the 400 back to you at a rate. So you really lost a significant discount because now you're getting, I think, around the avoided cost sometimes around 13, 16 cents per kilowatt rather than them paying the price that it would require for that. And so I strongly believe the commission needs to come back, look at its net metering policies to make that incentivization. I also think we need to expand our community solar rules so that we could incentivize communities to buy into solar, as well as looking at the option of allowing the industrial users to go procure this renewable energy at their own cost and then supply the excess power to the grid. That's a question that we're looking at and we're going to do. I think to the second point is then we also have to have conversations with our legislatures about potentially bringing back the tax credit to incentivize solar because the upfront cost to either construction, to put up on your homes, or put on businesses is really challenging. One of the things that we saw in my district in New Orleans, some of the community health centers did a purchase power agreement with a solar developer, put solar panels on the Crescent Community Health Center. Now it is a safe haven during power outages. The problem why they can't come do it in any other community health center in the state of Louisiana, we don't allow that type of business or that individual or that company to go have an outside contract with the developer to then put and procure that cost and put that solar on there. So I think the commission has a lot of work to do on this issue.
What power does the commission have versus the state versus the federal government versus the private investor?
Absolutely. I will tell you, Louisiana is one of two states where the entire power of regulation of our energy sector is from the Public Service Commission and the Public Utilities Commission is invested in the Constitution. 48 other states, the PSC or the PUC, whatever they may be called, are created by statute. And then as you have seen, legislators come in and make wild decisions. And I'll give two wild choices. California comes out and the legislature passes these hardcore requirements about how much energy has to be renewable and how fast they must do it, which sometimes doesn't match the market and is undoubtedly raising prices in California. You can go to another state like South Carolina, where the commission found a company to have been running a power plant uneconomically, but because that power plant is in a legislator's district, they have now gone and overridden the commission and now are requiring to allow that company to recover money that should go back to the people. Louisiana stands in a place where we don't have that intrusion. The legislature nor the governor, under the current Constitution, can dictate to the commission how and what we do when it comes to the utility regulation business. Now, we still have some federal guidelines from FERC, which is the Federal Regulatory Electric Commission, that typically looks at transmission and interstate. So a lot of our challenges, sometimes we as the commission have to go to FERC because Entergy, as you know, is a company that operates in 4 jurisdictions. So sometimes if there's an issue that we have to, like we are currently suing them for what we believe was imprudent practices at Grand Gulf Nuclear Facility, we have that, but right now we're pretty independent. I mean, I think one of the challenges, though, of that independence is since we are not like other states, when you look at the Inflation Reduction Act passed by Congress and the Infrastructure Jobs Act, a lot of the money that would typically flow through commissions were put in what we call state energy offices. But in most of those states, because they're not constitutionally created, the commission and the state energy office are closely aligned. our state energy offices in the Department of Natural Resources, we are not aligned because of our constitutional power. So it's going to be a lot of work when it comes to these home energy rebates, the solar for y'all, and that coordination. So while I love that independence for the commission, some of the federal programs now are becoming complicated to enact simply because of that independence. Yes, sir.
Several years ago, you had mentioned that you were against nuclear power, but the changes that have gone in nuclear power, where do you stand with that, and would you elaborate why you were against nuclear power?
Yes, so I originally have opposed nuclear power, one, because of the cost and maintenance to do so. They typically go over budget and over time. We are seeing the deployment and the development of small modular reactors that could potentially provide significant capacity to handle our baseload growth of need. But I think nuclear is still in its development phase another way out. I will say nuclear is a better option than coal and natural gas because it is more environmental friendly. It is not producing as much CO2 emissions as other types of generation we use for electricity. But the challenge of nuclear right now, is it cost effective? Is what we would spend for it? I mean, we can look at Georgia. Georgia just built a Vogtle, a nuclear power plant. And that power plant went almost over $20 billion over budget. And so it has come online, and it went offline a little bit, and it's now back running. And so while I am not opposed to the development, I don't think we're there yet to deploy it in a way that is cost effective, but also worth the time until the science catches up a little bit more. Yes, sir.
In the event, in the event that during your term there is an opportunity for a rewrite of the Louisiana Constitution, is there anything that you would like to see that would help you be able to do better and more effective job for the citizens and lay people?
Yeah, so his question was about if a new constitution, would there be more? I think because of the powers invested to the commission under the current constitution, I would say we should keep them that way. Louisiana is one of 10 states that elect commissioners. 2 states are elected via the legislature, and then the remaining 8 states are elected via the people of their state. I think that's an important requirement to keep. One of the reasons I say that is because we have independence. If you are a governor appointee, that means the commission's priorities can change. And that doesn't even have to be, because utility regulation is not as partisan as I think some may make it to be. It is about risk, right? Where do you want the risk? Do you put more risk on the ratepayers? Do you put more risk on the company? Do you put more risk in this evolving technology? I think if we would take away our elections for commissions, that would be damaging. But I also do think if we took ourselves out of the Constitution, and no offense to all my dear friends in the legislature, I think if we were having bills about how much solar Entergy or CLECO could use, what does bury this here, I don't think we would have the attention to the rate impact, because one of the things that we always look at is cost-benefit analysis. Is this a prudent investment? And sometimes friends who ideologically agree with me about moving towards 100% renewable energy and friends who disagree with me about it, I think could pass some very dangerous bills that would not be able to be enacted correctly from a commission regulatory standpoint. So the most thing I can tell them to do is just leave the commission alone if we rewrite the Constitution. No, I'll take it real quick.
Okay. After the debacle in Texas, where you had one organization just giving access to wholesale prices, so when they had free, you won $10,000, but we weren't selling it and making a profit, we were just giving you access. You regulate electricity, telephones, railroads, but not natural gas. But corporations can put in their contracts things like, you must be weatherproof at your wellhead, and we're going to inspect it. Is that something that you should do or have done to make sure that natural gas flows, even if it's 0 degrees outside? Absolutely.
I think this is a big concern and something you talked about the Winter Storm Uri. And there are a lot of theories about what happened in Texas, but the main thing that happened while there were significant blackouts was all of the gas generators went down because the pipelines froze and the gas could not transmit itself. That is a deep concern, and that's also why I talk about the diversification of our generation mix. It is not to be anti-gas, but it is, while it is a dispatchable generation, I can turn that switch on, right, and power that gas generator. We are seeing the changing of climate that is making it where those generators may not be able to perform at all or to perform to the capacity that we needed to so the prices stay low. So these are definitely conversations that I've engaged Secretary Gray at the Department of Natural Resources on, and I think the Commission should look at. And it deeply affects people and your businesses, because I mean, one thing I'll tell you, go look on your bill. There's what's called the fuel adjustment clause. That's typically because we use so much natural gas as our generation. And one thing about that is a volatile commodity. It's going to change with the prices. If the gas is more expensive, your bill goes up. One thing to know is there's also a lag. We call the regulatory lag. There's about a 2 to 3 month lag period between before that price reflects on your bill. So if you're in the summer months and you're saying, hey, I'm using less electricity, why is my bill going up? It may be because 2 months ago, gas was really high, and now you're seeing that flow through on your bill. And so I think we have to look at part of modification of natural gas and what we do, but we also have to recognize this is why diversification of our electric grid is so important, because we cannot find ourselves to be in a way of Texas where we may see a winter storm, which we have seen in Louisiana. The gas generators go down, and what did I tell you? That's 97% of our electric grid right there. The state could see significant blackouts just from that alone.
All right, that's it. Commissioner Davante, I got one very important question. On the solar, could you elaborate on what the governor, the president gave money to for solar?
Yes, so I mentioned that Louisiana was one of the states that had applied and received federal funds for what was called Solar for All. It's an incentivization of rooftop solar, of community solar, of loan programs, and so the state got around $146 million. That program is being administered by the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources. They are still working through their plan. We, as the Public Service Commission, have showcased interest to help coordinate. I am looking at our rules to make sure that we can deploy that money, but ultimately that would be a decision of the governor and the secretary if they actually therefore then submit the plan to spend the money.
Will they also include citizens' input on that matter?
That would be a question for the Department of Natural Resources. I've been engaged with them. I've told them how important this is. There's been a lot of community engagement, but we just got the award a few months ago, and they're now working through their administration plan. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you all.
I was going to ask a question. Are you in favor of solar? Well, that, as an economist, I think of electric water